of my money is gone. I've already spent everything I have, yet I'm not getting better. I'm just really progressively getting worse. But she changed what she said, and she said instead, if only I may touch his clothes, I will be made well. Whoa. Now that was a change in the things she had been saying. She'd come to grips with the idea that nothing was going to change her from going to the doctors, but if she could somehow touch Jesus, she would be made well. Somewhere we've got to be able to learn to put our confidence in the very source of our healing. I want you to see this. Jesus was the source of her healing. And a few years ago, I got a phone call. My cousin is a pastor of a church in the state of Missouri, near Joplin, Missouri, and there was a little girl, I believe she was about 2 years old. About 2 years old, and she had had an infection, and her temperature had spiked to over, well, it's 106 plus, 106 degrees plus. And she was in the hospital. They go to the hospital in Joplin, and they thought she had meningitis. And so they rushed her by ambulance to Springfield, to the hospital there. When she got to the hospital in Springfield, by that time, and the work that had been done on her in the ambulance as she traveled, they didn't even try to treat her in Springfield, and they put her on a helicopter in Springfield and life-flighted her to Kansas City. And by the time I got the phone call from my cousin, she was already on the helicopter. He said in about an hour, but when he was talking, he said in about an hour, she's going to be in Kansas City, but they don't really know if she'll be alive by the time they get there. So really, really pray. And so we began to pray, and I know there's others that were praying for this child. And so I'm watching the clock, and it's, an hour passes, and 2 hours pass, 3 hours pass, and I finally give up, and I expected to get a phone call, but I gave up and went to bed. The next morning I got up and got to thinking about that, and I called my cousin. And I said, Mark, what happened to you never let us hear. What happened to the baby? He said, I guess it's a false alarm. I said, what? He said, that she got to Kansas City and there wasn't anything wrong with her. She didn't have fever. False alarm, nothing. That baby was in the brink of eternity. And that's the way human mind takes a miracle and says, well, must not have been as bad as what we thought. But Jesus had stepped in on that situation and healed that child. And by the time that flight had taken her to Kansas City, she was completely well. They couldn't even find the source of why she'd ever been sick or why she'd ever had a fever, but she had completely been made whole. Somebody touched Jesus for that baby. And so this woman, first of all, changed what she said. She quit saying, I'm going to die, and she started saying, if I can touch Jesus, if I can touch Jesus, I will be made well. Next thing she changed was what she did. Now, there really wasn't anything wrong with her going to the doctor. The doctor did not prevent her from getting well. Just at that time, he did not have anything he could do for her. And I do not discourage people from seeking help from doctors. That's not a wrong thing. That's not a lack of faith. But what's important is that we keep centered on this. I am going to Jesus. If the doctor has something that he can do to help me, to make me feel a little bit more comfortable or to stabilize my situation, then that's great. But when my answer comes, my answer is coming from Jesus. The psalmist said, I will lift up my eyes to the hills. And then he says, from whence Or from where? From where does my help? Where does my help come from? I'm looking at the hills. Oh, that's a little bit too low. I need to be looking just a little higher than the hills. My help doesn't come from the hills. My help comes from the heavens. My help comes from the Lord. And this woman that was plagued by the disease determined, I am going to Jesus and I'm going to make this statement of faith. If I can touch him, I will be well. And she realized at that moment that Jesus was the opportunity for her to change her life. She could touch him, her life would be different. So here it was. There was a crowd of people that stood between her and Jesus. And it's amazing to me today how many folks are separated from their miracle by people. They let the crowd separate them from Jesus. And so that's why a lot of people that really know what the answer is do not get their answer. It's because they let people stand between them and Jesus. Could I tell you this? And this is, I cannot imagine how many times I've heard people say, well, I would really love to go to church, but I'm not going because there's just so many hypocrites down there in that church. I said, really? I've had people tell me that, not just about this church, but all over the country, everywhere people say, well, I don't go to church because of hypocrites. Really? How do you know there's hypocrites down there? I said, well, I just know there are. When I was a child, I had a drug problem. I was drugged to church every week. And so I went to church 2, 3, 4 times a week. We have revival, went to church every night, never missed service, have a special missionary service, I'm there. Whatever, I was at church. And after I was raised and kicked out of the house, I began to be an evangelist. I was holding revival meetings. I wasn't going to church a time or two a week. I was going to church 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times a week I was in church. So I've been to church as much as anybody's been to church. And to my knowledge, I have never met one hypocrite yet. Now, there may have been people that were not as close to God as they wanted to be, but I don't believe I met a hypocrite in all my life. One that absolutely, if I did, I didn't know him, that was pretending to be more than what they were. I don't know what they were. Yet these people that never go to church, they're sure that the church is full of them. I don't know how they know. Trust me, folks, there's a point in there somewhere that I'm making for you. But what I'm going to tell you is this. Listen to what I'm saying. If they were right and I was wrong, because I believe in you, there's not one person here today that I would accuse of being anything but what you claim to be, that you're here today as a seeker and you're looking for God. And but if they're right and I'm wrong, if I were in need of touching Jesus, I would not let that crowd keep me away from him. And that little lady, infirmed in her body, so sick, she was stooped over in pain. This story that I read you today is told in all 3 gospel stories, Matthew, Mark, Luke, all 3 tell this story. And every one of them add details that the other 2 leave out. And I want you to know this woman was in a hard way. She was stooped over. She was in pain continuously. She was weakened in her body. She had tried everything she had known. She is getting worse. But she pushed through the crowd. She didn't stop to ask anybody's credentials to see if they were genuine or not. She just pushed in because she was confident that if she could just somehow touch Jesus, she would be made well. And so she touched him. And when she did, she felt immediately in her body that she was well. See, Jesus was healing. for her and to touch him, that she was healed. He did not have to do anything to heal her. He didn't even know that she'd come up behind him. Was they were thronging him. I don't say that. I don't tell people that they're being thronged. You know, that's not my terminology, but that's what there were so many people he couldn't walk. The disciples trying to get him through the crowd, and they were we ought to illustrate that, but we're not going to. We just get somebody up here and show you what it's like to get thrown. But all of a sudden, with all these people pushing against him, and Jesus keeping his balance, all of a sudden he stops. Who touched me? Who touched me? Because he hadn't done anything to her. But when she touched him, power flowed out of his body, and she knew right then that she had been made well. Listen, I don't know what you need today, but Jesus doesn't need anything for you to change. He said Jesus doesn't need to do anything for you to change. If you need to be forgiven of sins and set free and made right with God, Jesus doesn't have to do anything for that to happen. If you're sick in your body, you need a miracle, and you need to be made well, Jesus today doesn't have to do one thing to make you well. He doesn't have to do one thing to restore your relationships or put your family back together. He doesn't need to do one thing because he's already done it. He's paid for your forgiveness. He's paid for your healing. The chastisement of our peace has been placed upon him. By his stripes we're healed. And he is everything that we need. All we have to do is touch him. Well, if I could get Jesus talked into it to helping me. You don't have to do that. All you have to do is touch him. He's already done what he needs to do to meet your need. Listen, you're here in church today, and it's good that you're here, and it's good that you believe in Jesus, and it's good that you believe that God can do anything. But your change will come when you touch him. When you touch Jesus. When he was touched, Jesus stopped the procession. He said to his disciples, "Who touched me?" They said, "Master, the crowd is thronging you. Everyone is touching you." He said, "Yeah, but somebody really touched me." Somebody, it wasn't just the throng. It wasn't just the crowd. Somebody by faith has touched me. Third thing that happened to this lady, changed what she said, and then she changed what she did. She quit saying, "The doctors can't help me." She started saying, "If I can touch Jesus, I'll be whole." And she changed what she did. She pushed through the crowd and actually touched him. And after that, she changed the way she walked. Up to this time, she had become weak, and 12 years of a bleeding issue had caused her to be anemic, and she was dying. But the minute she touched Jesus, she began to receive strength, and she could stand up straight, and she could walk because power had flowed into her body. Every step she took for the rest of her life, every step was a testimony that the power of the Christ had changed her life. You know, the Bible tells us the story of Jacob, who met the angel of the Lord on a night of crisis in his life. He really thought his life was over. He really thought that because of the things that he had done, the misdeeds, the sins, his lying, his cheating, his stealing, had caught up with him, and that the next day he fully expected that he and all of his family, all of his children, all that he owned would be destroyed and taken away from him the next day. And he caught a hold of the angel of the Lord and held on. And the angel of the Lord said, "Now let me go. Let me go. The sun's coming up. I need to go." And Jacob said, I will not let you go until you bless me. And he blessed him so much that he changed him. And he, from that day forward, wasn't just a cheater and a scoundrel, because he was changed. And from that day forward, he was a prince with God. And his name was changed to Israel. But the Bible says that the angel had touched him in his hip. And the rest of his life, he limped. You could see Jacob coming from a mile away and say, man, that's Jacob. How do you know? Well, because look how he walks. He has been touched by God. He's different. And see, from the time this woman touched Jesus, she walked differently the rest of her life. When you touch Jesus, it will change your life. It won't just change what you used to be, but it'll make you different from that day forward. When you touch Jesus, when the hand of God is upon you, you walk differently. I noticed, because I'd looked at all three of these stories, because I got to tell you, I'd like to always tell you that I just look at the Bible, and when the Bible says something, I just preach to you what it says. But sometimes I get my own agenda and want to say something that the Bible doesn't really say. I'll excuse that, and I'll tell you about that another time. Make an excuse for that another time. What I mean is, sometimes you think, well, this really ought to be in there. And I just thought Jesus should have said that, woman, well, because what he said is, your faith has made you whole. I thought he should have said, all right, go and sin no more. But he didn't really say that. He really didn't say it. So I'm just being honest. He didn't really say it. But it's amazing how many times he did say that. He said that to blind man when he made clay and healed his eye. He said that to the woman who was caught in adultery when they were wanting to stone her, and he rebuked those condemning judges and delivered her from their hand to go and sin no more. And I want to tell you, the man was let down through the roof to where Jesus was in the house. They couldn't get in because the crowd was too big, and they just tore off the roof and let that paralytic down on a stretcher in front of Jesus. Jesus said, son, your sins are forgiven you. I just love this. It really doesn't matter where you came from. Doesn't matter which direction you came from to get to Jesus. You can walk out of there a person that's free, man, delivered from the power of darkness. He can set you free regardless of where you came from. Amen. Amen. So, are you ready? Are you ready for a change? Well, I don't know what your agenda was. I don't know if it's your family needs a miracle. I don't know if in your physical body you need a miracle. There'll be a lot of people that need a financial miracle. There'll be people that need a miracle in their heart, needs their life changed. They need to be set free from the power of sin and released. Jesus said, I've come to bind up the brokenhearted. I want you to know there's a lot of people that have a broken heart, and they need the Lord to do just that in them. Are you ready for your change? See, you can see that Jesus is the source of your change. He really doesn't have to do anything else to meet your need. All you need to do is you need to touch him. And if you touch him, he will make you every bit